Right. Welcome to Heights of Iron 4, specifically the mod, The New Order Last Days of Europe. Fair warning, as you can see here, uncensored extremist symbolism is certainly present here. So, if you can't handle it, don't watch this, or the rest of the series. Alright, moving on. So, a quick descriptor. A new order has suspended upon the world. With the triumph of the Axis powers in the Second World War, the world has been forever changed. Yesterday's great empires are knocked dust under the boot of today's victors. A German lands on the moon as Hitler fades. In America, the old system lies shattered. The Mediterranean's power balance lies on a knife's edge. China, little more than a slave of Japan, begins to transform itself. And in Russia, long-damned warlords realize their destiny. Anyway, if you couldn't tell from the title, we are playing the Siberian Black Army. So this isn't quite a normal play for a game. The very first reason is because it's actually 1962, not 1936, so technology has definitely advanced pretty far. Additionally, it's TNO. Look at this event. Yeah. This is, it can be very aptly described as a story-driven game, much more so than anything else. Alright, I'll go ahead and read everything out loud. This is going to be fun. The Siberian Black Army. To most, anarchy is a derogatory term, one that means the total collapse of society, and best suits war-torn nations, bursting at the seams with misery and suffering. To the Black Army of Central Siberia, anarchy is not a term to spat out a political opponent. Anarchy is something to be cherished, to be embraced as the end state of the natural progression of humanity. While Kachurians shout from the rafters of the failures of anarchism, the people residing within the communes care little for their opinion. A deep sense of camaraderie and fellowship has been fostered in the free territory over the last few years, can show that anarchism is the underdog ideology, seemingly impossible, yet in practice bringing prosperity to the people. Anarchy, of course, can be something much, much darker. Even has sliders for up and down. If one were to ask General Ivan Stepanov if he were an anarchist as he led his division into Yagoda's eastern rump state, the officer in the Central Siberian Republic would most certainly turn you away. Not out of his commitment to Russian democracy or out of disdain for the tyranny of the Yagoda regime, but out of opportunism. It was opportunism that got him transferred out to the Western Front. It was opportunism that got him in the higher echelons of the CSR, Central Siberian Republic. When Stepanov looked out to his very troops on the day of the final assault towards Irkutsk, he saw a decade of war and people yearning for peace, but more so, he saw an opportunity. Yuri Galanskov was nothing more than a student when his life was ripped away from him. Growing up in Bukharin's Russia, Yuri saw the failures of the state on a daily basis, but it was his father who had instilled in him the disdain, not just for the Tsar or the fascist, but for the oppressive state in any form, in any clothes it may try to disguise itself in. Even as the CSR claimed to be the torchbearer of the people's struggle for peace, it marched its war-torn men into war daily. Galanskov made impassioned speeches before his countrymen, calling for freedom from war and those who send men off to die in it. Fate works in strange ways. In real life, General Stepanov would have most likely only seen Yuri from the end of a long rifle, and yet, by pure chance, the two were able to strike a deal. Stepanov would provide military power, and Galanskov will bring his popular support to the table. The pieces were set in place, and with a set in place. Can't believe I found a typo. And only after so long. I've played this country a few times. With a final act of rebellion, the free territory established itself as an independent land, far from the grip of the state. While the free territory may be equipped to deal with the external threats, Kalanskov will soon find that the greatest threats are those that come from within. Features decide the very fate of anarchism. Muster a strong defense force to protect the people from the state. Make Mother Anarchy proud. Destiny lies ahead. Yeah, so let's actually turn on the fascist back on. This is also Latinized Japanese. The Unity Pact, Einheits Pact, Triumvirate, and the Open Organization of Free Nations. And here we have all of Russia. Look at this. Normally the screen is reserved for things like, oh, you have your economy, you have trade, conscription. But now we have so many other things attached onto the side to basically just tell specifically how your state looks like and how people are doing in it. A short list of what is going on. Political parties, one-party state. Religious rights, secular. Trade unions, all trade unions allowed. Immigration, open. Slavery, outlawed. Public meetings, allowed. Free press, universal voting rights. Vetted entry for refugees. Conscription, volunteer only. Total service equality for women, which basically means they serve. Basically, if they want to join the army, they basically can. No supervision on the military. It's basically how completely they're supervised. It affects attack or support and experience gain from leaders. Training, just basic. Nothing special. Racial integration, minority protections within the military. Draft exemptions, none at all. Trade laws, export focus, war economy, medium level of taxation, flat taxation, good minimum wage, which is actually the max level. Which is great, isn't it? 12-hour workday. Could be better, could be worse. Child labor, illegal. Pensions are acceptable, though not quite good. No unemployment subsidies, however. Acceptable safety regulations. Public healthcare. No pollution controls. Honestly, one of the few places where, but no pollution controls is actually pretty normal. Public education. Capital punishment. Legal protections for the LGBTQ, which is very unique. I don't think any other country has that at the moment. Has it that good, anyway. Promoted gender equality. Equal rights for minorities. And regular police for security. We aren't anarchic. Lastly, the cream of the crop in TNO, social development, societal development, which shows pretty much an overview of how good things are within the country, basically how developed things are. You have academic base, which for me is basic literacy, research facilities, outdated, agriculture, basic mechanization, poverty, 50 to 80%, that will get better though, industrial equipment, just power tools, unless we use power tools. Industrial expertise, nascent industrial based, army professionalism, disgruntled veterans, nuclear stockpile. I don't actually have one. Would be a bit absurd to have one. Yeah, so one of the special things about this is the unique mechanic for the Siberian Black Army. The General Assembly. You have a myriad of options that you can do. Once you pick one, it costs 25 political power to pick one, then you have 60 days to convince half the communes to agree. If you manage to get half to agree, then you get a positive effect, which depends on which you picked. If you don't, you get a negative version of it, although it's not difficult. Description. Let me read it. The communes of the Free Territory form the General Assembly, a de facto legislative body for our glorious society. Here, the grievances and ideas of the communes can be heard and collective decisions made for the benefit of all free peoples of the world. Naturally, we are free of the corrupt dealings and tit-for-tat bourgeois democracies, and any appearance of such is a simple misinterpretation of anarchist methods. You'll see that it's, that's mildly sarcastic. Also special, since we are in Central Siberia, Legacy's Siberian plan. You can actually see its effects here. Currently no effect, but that will come to change as I gain more political power. I'm not going to read every single focus out loud. I already expect this campaign to take at least 8 hours. If I read everything, it would triple that. At the very least, reading it out loud. The Reich's last conquest. On the 19th of January, 1962, Eberhard Kühne became the first man to ever land on the moon. While the space race has been a struggle between the Reich, Japan, and the USA, and while the Americans managed to put the first man in space, the Führer was proud to announce that the German landing firmly plants the Reich as the victor in the competition. A grand ceremony is planned in Germania. Yeah, they renamed Berlin. To present Kühne and his fellow astronauts with the Iron Cross, and a week of celebration has been declared across the Reich. While terse congratulations have been sent from America and Japan, President Nixon has vowed the U.S. would be the first to create a permanent mission on the moon, basically permanent moon colony, and Japan shortly thereafter announced it would be the first to land on Mars. However, that stuff doesn't really come to be since Sarah Peters out. Right, I need political power. The most grand of experiments. Here we are. Yuri Galanskov brought the vehicle to a halt. His hand hovered slightly over the keys, his body suddenly drained of motivation and energy. From the cracked and snow-covered windshield, Yuri could see people trickle into the General Assembly building. A smile crept across his face. It never ceased to amaze him. People, hundreds of them, men and women alike, had attached themselves to the anarchist movement, and the most grand experiment in human history. Yuri sat and watched, and watched, and watched. It was as if the car had turned a 5-mile drive into a journey into an alternate reality. Boo! A hand pressed against the window, stirring Yuri from his motionless, watch, I guess. Another typo. Yuri looked to his left, grinning like a child. The woman kept her hand against the window for stability, needing to get a look inside the vehicle. Are you ready to go? Yuri shrugged, sure he was ready to speak for the people. If he had a seed for every speech he gave, he could feed all of Russia with one garden. There was something off, despite how routine it seemed. He lost in thought again, the woman said, shifting her weight from one foot to another. If you were anyone else, I'd ask you what's on your mind, but I know. I know. The woman averted her gaze from Yuri. The two sat in silence. The woman took a deep breath. Come on, Yuri, they need you in there. Let's not keep them waiting, Yevgenia. Oh yeah, there's no actual leader specifically. All we have is Yuri. He's the head of government. Leader description for the Siberian Soviet. In the wake of the Union's collapse, the people of the Angaras Basin found themselves free from the authority of Moscow. Okay, assassin strikes at Hitler. In short, he basically realizes how mortal he is and how close to death he is, so he will pick a successor. We'll see who it is. Anyway, the first thing they did, in a true socialist fashion, was to assemble a committee. Many of the regional institutions were functioning without Moscow's oversight. There was some rationing and belt-tightening. Many of the goods that it imported from elsewhere in the Union could be forgone or replaced with local substitutes. Contact with the remnants of the Soviet government in Western Russia had been lost, and they were hesitant to acknowledge the democratic provisional government of the Central Siberian Republic and the tyrannical regime of generic Yagoda alike, forming self-defense militia squads fighting for their freedoms with blood. And thus, influenced by the influx of once ostracized anarchist thinkers from the farthest parts of the Soviet Union, they proclaimed their independence as the Siberian Anarchist Soviet, a self-governing ruling body with equal representation for all major towns and industrial unions. As their position became secure from the foreign threats, the Siberian Black Army, the military force of the free communes of the shores of Iya, became one of the leading voices in the Soviet and declared the militarized anarchism as its main platform. The militia service became an essential part of every man and woman of the free territory, and the armed formation of the free communes are assembled not merely as a means of self-defense for the free communities, but also as a means of spreading the liberating ideology abroad. The spreading militarization of the anarchist society, seemingly contradictory to anarchist ideals, caused surprisingly little tensions between the army and the Soviet. But many of the commoners fear that the ambitions of the Black Army, the protector of the independence of Siberian communes, will eventually become the undoing of their own freedoms. Alright, so Hitler names Martin Bormann as his successor. More of the same what we've seen. Yeah, he's a conservative. He basically keeps things going as previously. Right, so raiding is sadly part of daily life in Russia, and as much as we hate to admit it, it's one of our few means of survival. As such, we must be ready to organize raids into neighboring territories to gather food, equipment, and resources. With the 15 political power I just gained, I'll scavenge for loot. It lowers factory output by 15%, but after it's done, I will gain a loot. And loot can be used for one of 5 things. When I select it, I will lose 2 loot, gain 2 stability. During that period, I will gain 0.15 less political power, and have 5% reduced war support. However, once it's removed, those debuffs disappear, and I will gain a boost in one of the 5 societal developments that I can prove in this way. Either academic base, research facilities, industrial equipment, industrial expertise, or agriculture. Wait, let me adjust a couple things. Right, now we can start preparing for raiding too, since we now have 20 command power. Side note, I have 0 DLCs for Hoi, so quite literally this stuff is useless to me. Except in this way. Out of all of them, these 2 are potential unifiers. Krasnoyarsk is supposed to be a unifier, however they do have a major issue. They're not done yet. In fact, they're one of the 2 warlords that at the moment aren't finished, at least within Russia. There's Kazakhstan, which has only skeleton content at the moment. But yeah. It's Krasnoyarsk, and the Order of St. George. They're supposed to eventually become potential unifiers, which means they can eventually come to unify Russia. Some countries can't. One example would be Oryosha down here, or the Southern Urals, of which Orenburg happens to be the other anarchist country in the world. Although they're doing a lot worse than we are. Tomsk is huge, however they do have a pretty good So their army might take a while to come to me, however, it is pretty strong. And the People's Revolutionary Council is also rather strong, especially since they are the only ones that start with one specific thing. Airborne units. Yeah, this is 1962, so airborne divisions are a thing. Helicopter units. They start with helicopters and lot. Helicopters themselves aren't particularly powerful. They're not much better than the infantry. Sort of like how motorized isn't much better than infantry. However, they do have one massive buff. The average movement speed, the regular movement speed of an infantry unit, is 4 kilometers per hour. Motorized can do around 16, I think. Let me check, actually. 14, although as you improve, it becomes better as you get upgraded equipment. Helicopters, on the other hand, well, actually, they're down here. Helicopters, on the other hand, can go much, much faster. 40 kilometers an hour. 40. They move 10 times as fast as any regular infantry, and twice as fast as motorized, not more so. Anyway, we've got plenty of political power at the moment, thanks to the convene the General Assembly being completed and giving me 50. I'm going to adjust things somewhat. There's certain ones I don't like, for a variety of reasons. One of the big ones happens to be expand volunteer programs. Raises 450 manpower, grants 3% popularity to libertarian socialism. I go down here to increase militia reliance. I get 1,000 manpower, plus 5% base war support, and plus 4% to popularity to libertarian socialism. Which is exactly why I don't select it. Anyway. Let's develop civilian industry. Important is that it improves poverty rate. And also adds a civilian factory, so I can construct faster. Now, in order to win the vote, I need to have more than half of the commune supporting. Currently, Kansk is the only commune. However, to convince them, I can just click this. This is actually great. I have no RP experience, so this says nothing. Yeah, communes can request a variety of things. Now that I gave it to them, they support. And once 60 days are up, my poverty rate improves. I will gain 3% popularity towards libertarian socialism, which is the ruling ideology, which is always great. And also a civilian factory. Well, civilian factory increase improved poverty rate. Yeah, that's going to be slow for the first stage. It's already been half an hour. The convention of the General Assembly. Yuri Galanskov rubbed his hands together for warmth. On his sides, burly giants covered in enough body hair to substitute a fur coat that performed a protective barrier around him. As they approached the building, Yevgenia had been nudged out of the circle. How he wished he hadn't. Yuri had faced assassination attempts before, but the idea never really scared him. It almost enticed him. Dying for a cause he believed in, but dying before he could accomplish his goals shook him to his core. Regardless of his opinion, the Black Army stood at his side, prepared to die on the dirt they stood on. He made a mental note to thank them, even if their service was completely voluntary, and as Yuri might add, unrequested. The pack stopped before the doors. Casual conversation was audible from inside. Yuri smiled again. He caught himself smiling more and more often, unbothered if it harmed his reputation as a leader, as his friend Ivan Stepanov warned. His warm face contrasted the cold hands that pushed dramatically against the doors, demanding silence throughout the room. Yuri made his way down the aisle, shaking hands with the packed-in people, laughing and reminiscing with recognizable leaders from the communes on the other side of the territory, and solemnly nodding to the stories of the gray-haired, the widowed, and the childless. Yuri had finally made his way from one end of the hall to another. There sat a podium and 7 chairs. The members of the Security Council had already taken their seats and left the podium free to its most frequent occupant. "Free people of Russia," Yuri shouted from his spot, his mere 4 words sending the assembled masses into cheers. "I have promised to Ivan that I would be brief in my opening remarks, and we know it's wise to avoid irritating him." Yuri turned his head back to the chairs, flashing a thumbs up to a not too amused Ivan Stepanov. "So let me say this. Even if this meeting is fruitless, know that every day that we live without the rising sun, torch, swastika flying over us, we have won. Liberation, one meeting at a time." Yep. That was a fast Mongolian civil war. I accidentally turned that on. Right. Well, that was really fast, so in comes what comes next. Alright, but first this event. The old men that defend anarchy. Stamp, lick, seal. Envelope after envelope, Ivan Stepanov repeated the same mantra to keep pace. After the 20th envelope, he fell into the rhythm of the record player droning on in the background. Stamp to the 8th notes, lick to the quarter, seal to the half. Ivan appreciated patterns. They say pattern finding is what makes people human. It was nice to feel human now and then in between being a glorified mailbox, taking in the information from different Black Army detachments and sending back responses. Ivan froze in place, his stamp hovering above the envelopes. Something was off in his rhythm. It wasn't the record. He had thoroughly inspected it before he even paid the Breton. I'll come back to that point later. No, it came from outside the room. The clicking of boots on tile. Stepanov groaned, straightened out his jacket, and set the stamp down. He could recognize the footsteps from kilometers away. "Companion Stepanov, it's time to go." There he was. No one really understood how Androniy Misharenko ended up in a position of power, or how he commanded such respect and power amongst the people. Stepanov assumed it was because he represented the Russian people best. Vitriolic, grizzled, old. He has been everywhere along the Western Front, receiving distinction in his struggle against the Finns. As the Union collapsed, so did he, breaking down in Kansk, his hometown. "Are the others out there?" Stepanov swept his arms across his desk, pushing the envelopes into a bin. "Valentiv and the other members of the Security Council?" The old man nodded, holding his hands behind him. "Chapyev will be late, but that means he'll show up as Kalanskov does. Without the Security Council, free territory would be chaos." Yeah, so about that point, Brittany is the controller of a massive black market that stretches across the Unity Pact, the Einheitspact. Eventually, they can continue to expand it. They basically run a giant arms operation. Ooh, treasure. So the raid was successful, and I got some loot out of it. And now that the scavenging is complete, I now have 2 loot. I'll go with building new schools, since basically, the academic base affects factory output, production efficiency cap, and research speed, which is all pretty important. The City of Oz. Nadia reached out to touch her breath as it hung in the air before her. She attempted to bottle of gas, capture it in her mittens, and take it with her, to no avail. Nadia was surely smart enough to know that one could not capture the air they breathed and stow it away for later. If she wasn't, her grandfather who walked beside her certainly could have. There was just a certain magic to the city of Kansk, an indescribable feeling as long as she kept to the sidewalk of the city. Anything could happen. "Look here," Albon gestured to one of the infinite identical gray shops. "I don't know if she still lives there, but there was a woman." Albon trailed off on one of his stories again. Nadia rolled her eyes. It was all he spoke about, the past. Every rock seemed to remind him of a different person. It would remind him of an experience, which will remind him of a battle. Didn't he see what was in front of him? They were in Kansk, city of the revolution, the first stepping stone in the global movement of liberation. How incredible! Well, her grandfather said, mercifully wrapping up his story, I don't know whatever happened to Svetlana. Can't remember if she was the one who went out to try to join the fascist party, or if she was the one who ran and won in Tomsk. Either way, all I remember is that you had to spit in her soup just to give it some flavor. All the bloodshed in Russia is worth this moment. Right, so, one other thing. We have, beyond the legacy of the Siberian Plan, there's also the Siberian Free Territory. Minus 10% political power gain, minus 10% division organization, but plus 15% of stability. Our little patch of land is one of the few places on this downtrodden earth where the ideals of anarchism can thrive without the threat of revisionists or counter-revolutionaries. However, our little commune, as spirited as it is, needs more than just revolutionary spirit. It needs a purpose and unity of direction. Without these, our experiment will collapse. Keep going in infantry weapon improvements. Next, militarized society. Plus 1% of recruitable population, plus 5% recruitable population factor, plus 15% war support. We are not the weak and defenseless communes spread throughout Russia. Secure in our ideals, and confident that the forces of reaction and the tyrannical outside world shall not conspire to destroy us. No, we are far more enlightened than that. The revolution shall always have enemies, and so our guns shall not rest until every corner of our land has been touched by the benevolent hand of Mother Anarchy. Black Army Administration, moderate. Plus 5% to division recovery rate, plus 5% attack, plus 0.04 daily despotist support. In order to bring the revolution to all of Siberia, and ensure our freedoms protected from those who would destroy us, we must ensure that we are well practiced in self-defense. The Black Army, thus, ensures that there truly is a rifle behind every blade of grass, and the natural administrative shortcomings of anarchism are compensated for by giving militia commanders and the overall leaders of the Black Army a form of overall control. The Revolution's book balancer, Mikhail Kilchakov, yawned. Well, Kilchakov, there, yawned. What more was there to do? What insightful commentary could he bring to the issue of the legacy of Makhno? Was the assembly going to request Kilchakov to determine how much it had cost to hang up paintings of Makhno in color versus photographs? Ridiculous. Impatiently, Mikhail drummed his fingers on the thick binders of the information gathered from his studies. Each commune had their own binder, each village had their own folder, and each factory had its own page. Printed twice, of course, because the half-wits running this whole operation would likely ruin his magnum opus. What matter if the materials themselves were made of the finest diamonds out there? Somehow, someway, the Security Council will find some way to leave the pages ripped and stained. Companion Kilchikchakov. That name is so hard to pronounce. Companion Galanskov had called for him a few times, he assumed, judging by his tone of voice. He raised his eyebrows to show he was listening, but made no attempt to apologize for ignoring Yuri. The assembly is, well, has been, ready for a report about the economic forecast for the coming year. Mikhail rose from his seat, his binders in hand, and began to walk down the aisle of officers and senior members of the Black Army. As he paced up and down, distributing his findings, he spoke. I know most of you don't care for numbers like I do, so I'll do my best to condense these findings into layman's terms. Kilchikchakov set the last of the binders down and presented a graph. Across the y-axis here, you can follow the green line as it climbs. This, companions, is a representation of the needs of the Black Army and the communes, combined, for simplicity, compared to the total output of the Free Territory. Mikhail traced his finger along the graph. You don't need an education to see. Things are looking quite well for us. Now, on to my next point. Yeah, he's basically the economist. He's the one that runs the economy. Can scavenge for loot again. Nice. Deep within the halls, an extensive list of grievances. Deep within the halls of the General Assembly, tucked away in the often unused back rooms, a man had stomped in a huff, marching straight past the people patiently waiting for their turn to speak. Demolished. Everything gone from that hunt, and that was only the first day. The second day, some bastard from up north brought a whole pack of dogs into my farmland. Have you seen the damage 30 wolves can do? How will I provide for my children, for the children of my neighbor? It is my duty to provide for the entire village. Pavel and his fat wife couldn't grow crops if they walked into the soil themselves. We are going to... Are you even listening? In all honesty, Arcadia hadn't been listening from the beginning. Had they even expected them to do... Had they even expected them to? Just like all the rest, he would nod, he would grumble about his swift death, and life would go on. His wife, Mila, was kind enough to accompany him, at the least. She was a fool, though. She listened. She nodded along, but did so with strained eyes, focusing on each word said and jotting down notes simultaneously. Your situation is not just untenable, Mr. Kuznetsov, it's abhorrent. You embody a beautiful spirit, one that wraps itself around this land and shields us from the threat of our utter annihilation. Bewildered but flattered, the talkative man found himself at a loss for words. Arcady chuckled to himself, softly to himself. Oh, Mila, your golden tongue is unrivaled. Mila hardly noticed the words of her husband. Her attention focused solely on the paper before her. With a swift tear, Mila handed the paper to the man. Bring this to Demyan. It will assure grain is reallocated to your community. Thank you for bringing this issue to our attention. You have preserved the integrity of this free land. So thank you. I wasn't expecting any action on this, let alone this fast. Content, the man turned around and promptly left. Are you proud of that one, Mila? She nodded, still lost in her notes. I hope so. The line is extending into the hallway. A long night ahead. Yeah, but that's part of the ideal. Everyone gets a voice. No matter the situation. Well, it looks like the ideals to the east of us are gonna die. Oh, hey. Yugoslavia. That's certainly going to last. A communist country in Europe. Oh, the USA passed the Civil Rights Act. Election day. Name? Companion Mikhail Stepanov, sir. Though I suppose you know that already. The voice of the frail, pasty young boy trailed off, his eyes darting from spot to spot, as to avoid those of his father. Ivan Stepanov steepled his hands on the bench before him. I'll take the liberty of assuming you're aware of why you're here today. The boy nodded quickly. Stepanov gestured off to Galanskov. For the sake of the companion's desire to keep a good record of all meetings, I will allow the prospecting officer to recount his story. Mikhail's eyes widened in shock, his mouth slightly open, ready for the words to come pouring out but finding the well dry. Mikhail took a few breaths and regurgitated the lines his father had prepared for him. I oversaw the resupply of the commune at risk of famine. The situation was getting pretty bad. The sentence was more of a question than anything else. He spent the whole time looking to his father for approval, and only receiving a cold, unloving face. Then the worst possible thing happened. Questions began to roll in. First from Galanskov. What was the response from the community? Great. They were really pleased. Small village, though. None of them could make it. Then Misharenko. And during this time, did you notice any saboteurs from the Republic or the Soviets? Whoever was nearby. Right. Well, not that I saw. Misharenko frowned, and the boy adjusted. Of course. But if I did, they would have been shot on the spot. Finally, Stepan Valentiv, the most senior member of the Black Army. So, companion, Mikhail said, what did you actually do? Mikhail opened his mouth to answer, but was cut off by his father. A spotty of questions from the council. Lots of prospecting officers today. A motion to vote. Companion Mikhail Stepanov, you're hereby elected to officer. System isn't perfect, but... Yep, election of officers. Can't be democratic with that. I guess. There is one other place that does large-scale officer elections, though. People's Revolutionary Councils. Democratic military. Break time in the Congress. Ivan Stepanov was a man of military experience. He served for the Union, for the Siberian Republic, and now served as one of the most, if not the most, influential figures when it came to the affairs of the Black Army. Not the most recognizable, nor could he claim to have spent the most time on the front lines of them all, but he had seen his fair share of battle. Never in his service, however, has Stepanov worked as a medic. Yet, today, he nursed two things: his temples and his flask. Stepanov leaned against the wall outside the General Assembly. Galanskov had mercifully called for a recess after 4 hours of discussion about the official seal of the General Assembly, whether or not the wreaths should be red or blue. Ivan took a swig, gulping down his dwindling supply of vodka smuggled out from out west. He would relish in his few moments of peace he had left, however brief. Companion Stepanov, I hope there's water in your flask there. Yuri Galanskov shut the door of the assembly hall behind him as he stepped out into the hallway. Don't want your judgment impaired. We're moving on to some highly critical discussion. Stepanov scoffed. I'll take your word for it. Companion Stepanov, change is coming to Russia sooner than you think. We've been side by side for a decade now, and we've seen our highs and lows. But we've always been here, in Kansk. And if you weren't in Kansk, we're still in Kansk. Am I getting through to you? Something's got to give at some point. The revolution must progress. I would hardly consider myself a friend of liberty if I sat by while Russia squirmed under the boots of autocrats. Stepanov nodded along, not truly listening. He learned years ago how to tune out Yuri when he stopped speaking and began orating. Yuri gave his friend a pat on the back. Come on, Ivan. No time to waste. The revolution does not take breaks. Right, off to the second focus tree. Revolutionary Reconstruction. Right, we've got 4 trees at the moment. First, we've got 3 under here. First is the economy. Second is economy to build ourselves up. Second is political. Figure out all the contradictions, how exactly we should handle things. Third is the military to upgrade the Black Army. Fourth, unification. Conquest of Central Siberia. Oh yeah, the triumvirate collapsed. It's only a matter of time. They have competing territorial claims. Turkey wants, for example, the Levant back. Italy and Iberia both want to take over Algeria, and although Italy happens to own the Suez Canal, both Turkey and Iberia want access to it. Free access. The haunting of Kansk Elementary School. A scratch of chalk against the board produced a ghastly sound. Mr. Abramov scratched out a circular shape, drew a thin line across the bottom, put a triangle just above the line, and closed out his articulations by planting 2 dots on the left and the right of the triangle. The elderly man turned out to the class of young boys and girls. What do you think? Did I give Ilya Repin a run for his money? Silence from the class. Oh, you may be a little young for that one. The old man chuckled. Okay, how about now? Above the Frankenstein of shapes, Mr. Abramov wrote something resembling the word Nikolai, his arthritis sabotaging his effort, making the word look more like chicken scratch. The pieces finally came together as beneath the circle he wrote Bukharin. Oh, I know that guy. My mom has a painting of him. He was that man who fought the Germans and gave us the big factories we have today. One eager child sprung up from his seat, proudly displaying his knowledge. That's not true, Igor. My dad was there, you know. He lived in Moscow. He saw Bukharin's secret police firsthand. How they would just take you right off the streets if you were being bad. My dad calls him tyrant. Your dad sounds like an idiot. The schoolboy retorted. My mom would have had him clean the bathrooms if he heard him talk like that at our house. The chasm exploded into argument, factions of children forming about the legacy of a man long dead. As much as he was pleasantly surprised to see some debate, it was getting a little bit out of hand. Alright everyone, let's quiet down now. We're not going to make any progress calling each other names, will we? What do you think, Mr. Abramov? Was Bukharin a bad guy, or was he good like my mom says? The old man scratched at whiskers, quieting the students as he contemplated his answer. Finally, after what seemed like centuries to the children, the old man reached his conclusion, and all he did was shrug. Where to allocate? Most people had learned to respect Misharenko and Valentiv, love Galenskov and Tarutuda, and to be obedient to Stepanov years ago. What he saw before him were fools, even Ivan, who seemed the smartest of the bunch, didn't know the first thing about what really mattered once rhetoric and bullets had been stripped away. Money. I could offer you a lot of BS right now. Kill Chichakov. Gonna have to end the session here soon. Said blankly, looking right into the eyes of the members of the Security Council. Believe me, my wife has written and rewritten speeches 100 times over to try and communicate the fact to you, but I really do not see the point in that. Stepanov raised an eyebrow. Ivan had to read faces that much. Kirchikov knew. Ivan Stepanov was an actor, not by trade, but by lifestyle. Kirchikov had his suspicions about the fat general, but never had the concrete proof to present to the General Assembly. Okay then, what is your announcement, companion? Kirchikov rested his elbow on the bench of Tarutuda. He figured she'd be the least likely to swat him away. Actually, I've changed my mind. With the permission of the council, I will sprinkle in a little BS. With quizzical looks on their faces, the members of the Security Council did not make a sound. A silent consent. Great. I won't bore you with my entire life story. I dread speaking longer than I must. The reason I started working with numbers so many years ago is because they're static. They don't change. People do. That's why I could never follow in my father's footsteps as a preacher. I don't like too much change. A little is essential. What we have here is essential, but I can't track change. I'm not following, Galenskov said. What does this have to do with the budget? The numbers changed. My initial projections were not accurate. I effed up this time. What we have now is a crossroads. I have prepared 2 new economic models. One which prioritizes retooling of our existing factories, and another which plans out the construction of new ones. The choice is yours. I'm just a numbers guy. I can either increase maximum production efficiency at the cost of consumer factories, or decrease consumer goods factories at the cost of production efficiency. Right now, I don't really need more better consumer goods. I'm doing fine at the moment. I'd rather get more production efficiency. Yeah, let's stop here. It's gonna go faster. Events will become fewer and further in between. And eventually we'll start doing some actual wars rather than just raiding neighbors. Or getting raided by our neighbors. Well. Oh yeah. There is one last thing. If you've noticed, there's these states up here that I have not represented inside the end screen. There's a couple reasons for this. One of them is if you look at the flags, there's nothing there. The second is that they don't actually do anything right now. They call him the Father. Anyway, on that little note. Oh, I've already saved. Right. On that little note, I'll see you again next time. Until then, bye.